З 7 по 10 жовтня у Львові відбудеться 18-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень «Розвиток сталих інституцій в часи війни, цінності, самозарадність та партнерство».
Форум відбувається з ініціативи Інституту екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні та Євангелічною церквою Німеччини.
Роль інституцій в часі війни, досягнення соціальної згуртованості та прогресу в часи кризи та невизначеності, свідчення стійкості державних, освітніх, релігійних, культурних і громадських інституцій. Ці та інші питання обговорять експерти з України та за кордону.
В рамках міжнародного форуму відбудуться круглі столи, панельні дискусії, семінари, виставки, майстер-класи. Запрошуємо молодь, активних громадян, студентів, освітян, журналістів, представників релігійних та громадських організацій до участі.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті es.uku.edu.ua. Форум відбудеться у гібридному форматі – наживо та онлайн.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Since we have all the familiar faces here, I'm just going to address you in a very simple way, dear friends. Also, from the perspective that we are quite pressed for time, it's already the evening, we will make sure that it's a dynamic session, lively, interesting, and to make sure that other than our honorary speakers, we will also have an opportunity to talk and debate a little bit after the presentations. I would like to remind you that this session, named The Crisis of International Ecumenical Institutions in the Context of the War in Ukraine, it takes place in the shape of a seminar of the Ukrainian Christian Academic Society, UCAS. And I know quite a bit on UCAS. I have participated in many sessions during our ecumenical weeks mostly, but if you want to learn more, one of our participant speakers, Taras Korolets, is a scientific secretary, academic secretary of this society, and he will even tell you of the contribution fees to become a member of the society. We also have a partner, the UCU Church History Institute that I represent. I'm Oleg Tori, the head of the Church History Institute at the UCU. And within my powers as the moderator, pleasant obligations is to thank for the support of this event, Ecumenical Week altogether, but this specific event as well, to the representatives of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the representatives of which so nicely attended all other events, and they will forward our thanks further. We have simultaneous interpretation available, so I would like to ask the speakers to keep their pace, to enunciate, but at the same time, I would like to ask you, if possible, to stay within your time frame of 15 minutes to make sure that there's still a little bit of time left for questions and answers. And another word of gratitude goes to, in a way, our partner and sponsor. This is the advisor to the rector, head of the Institute of Religion and Society, Miroslav Marinovich. During the introductory session, he, in his welcome word, touched upon multiple topics that will be addressed today, and I think we will refer back to what he said. At least many of them are carved in my memory. So this is to kick us off, and without much ado, I would like to follow through with our agenda, and I would like to first introduce my great friend, Katerina Pekrida. She is a program officer for theology and studies at the Conference of the European Churches. It's an organization that unites, first of all, various Orthodox and Protestant churches all across the world, but this specific one in Europe. They are located in Brussels. In February, we had an opportunity to get to see one another in München. Unfortunately, Katerina isn't here in Lviv. I hoped to be able to see you, but still it's a pleasure that you can participate in the work of our panel, and the floor goes to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, dear Ole. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'm sorry I'm not physically there with you, as I'm sure also Father Manuel and Marek would have loved to be there with you. We need to come and visit you very soon. It's in our plans to be there. I want to thank the Institute of Ecumenical Studies and the Ukrainian Christian Academy Academic Society for this seminar and for this opportunity to be with you. In my contribution, I will focus on how the churches that are gathered in the fellowship of the Conference of European Churches have understood and expressed their responsibility for God's peace in the particular context of the Russian war against Ukraine. As mentioned by Ole, the Conference of European Churches is a fellowship of Anglican, Orthodox, and Protestant churches throughout the European continent, not just the EU, that gather together for theological dialogue, joint action, and advocacy towards the European political institutions. So I would like to share a bit about the background of our work on peace in Ukraine. On February 24th, 2022, we were starting an online European regional pre-assembly organized in cooperation with the Polish Ecumenical Council to explore the theme of the World Council of Churches Assembly, Christ's love moves the world to reconciliation and unity. This was the assembly that would take place later in the year. The beginning of the pre-assembly coincided with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And on that day, we invited to the meeting and we listened to voices of Christians from Ukraine as we were reflecting together on questions of unity, interconnectedness, reconciliation, and solidarity. Since that day and the full-scale invasion, Ukraine continued to be a focal point of all the events and our activities in the Conference of European Churches. The governing board, the decision-making body of the organization, as well as the joint committee between KEC and CCE, the Council of Bishops' Conferences in Europe, have repeatedly addressed the ongoing war and the call of churches to peace, while also informal exchanges with Ukrainian churches continued. Some of the culminating points of the exchange and solidarity with the churches and people of Ukraine have been the joint KEC and COMESE visit, COMESE, the Commission of Bishops' Conferences of the European Union, the joint visit of the presidents of the two organizations to Poland at the border with Ukraine in April 2022, where they addressed the migration crisis, and also the solidarity visit of the KEC president to Ukraine in the same year, where he met with several church leaders. And of course, another visit of the KEC leadership as a whole to the cities of Berehove, Lviv, and Kiev in April 2024, where we met with several churches and Ukrainian state authorities. So the Pathways to Peace initiative, which is the major program for KEC since the war started, is designed as a coordinated response to the Russian war against Ukraine, and it aims at addressing it from a variety of perspectives, from a theological perspective, from a political perspective, also from the perspective of advocacy work and religious diplomacy. And the aim here is to maximize the effect of European churches' response to war through building partnerships among churches and relevant partners. The concept for this initiative was drafted after a series of consultations with resource persons from Ukraine and also the broader region, as well as with member churches of the organization and other partners. And we are now in the phase of implementing concrete activities. So when the full-scale invasion started, the leadership discerned some key reasons why this work was essential, why it was essential to offer a coordinated church response in the frame of the Pathways to Peace initiative. First of all, it was the question of a representation of Ukrainians in ecumenical dialogue and also the European political debate. Ukrainian churches, as you are aware, had been largely absent from ecumenical official bodies, particularly, yes, on this higher level of official representation. This began to change when KEK welcomed the Orthodox Church of Ukraine into its membership and consistently extended invitations to all Ukrainian churches to participate in discussions concerning the war and the future of Ukraine, and that is irrespectively of membership. Similarly, the initiative aims to amplify the presence and contributions of Ukrainian churches and Christians within the EU political debate. Another reason for this program was the internal unity and also the need for reconciliation in Ukraine. We are, of course, aware that the churches in Ukraine participate in the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, and they present a united front when it comes to the war. But as it happens in many countries around Europe, there still remains a need for reconciliation of churches and also for overcoming mistrust and stereotypes and misconceptions about ecumenism. And that's a reality we have to face in ecumenism in general. The third reason for this initiative is a challenge we saw to Christian concepts of peace and reconciliation. The war has deeply challenged our foundational Christian understandings of reconciliation, peace, and truth across Europe. Although the ecumenical movement, as you know, has issued several agreed texts and statements on peace since 1925, the full-scale war revealed our struggle to articulate a common theological language in the face of violent conflict. The fourth reason is the role of church leadership in justifying the war. We have a senior leader and the broader hierarchy of a major Orthodox church that has been providing moral and theological justification for Russia's war against Ukraine, while promoting an anti-Western ideology. This has further complicated the ecumenical landscape and also challenged the credibility of Christian witness. A fifth reason was the self-understanding of the organization and the identity. The Conference of European Churches was founded, as other ecumenical organizations, as a peace initiative, and peace and reconciliation have been at the core of our work. The initiative builds on earlier thematic work on peace building, which defines peace as public witness and also public theology in action. There are three main objectives under this initiative. The first one is to keep developing a network of church leaders, officers, intellectuals, academics in preparation for peace in Ukraine, to build up relationships between Ukrainians and partners while discussing ongoing developments in Ukraine and discerning what is the role of churches in this process of preparation for peace. The second objective is a bit more practical, and it relates to the position of the organization in Brussels, and that is to advocate for the protection of destroyed damaged, or looted religious sites in Ukraine. This objective focuses on assisting churches to reconstruct religious infrastructure and in this way to contribute to the overall goal of realizing freedom of religion or belief for all in Ukraine. The aim here is to assist the churches to apply for reconstruction funds from European sources. The third objective is to enhance the ecumenical vision of just peace. This objective facilitates exchange on just peace among European churches, and it aims at increasing the ability of churches to address the rhetoric of exceptionalism and supremacy, while examining links to theological justifications of war in Ukraine and enhancing the capacity of the churches to do theology on war, peace, and reconciliation in a responsible and informed way. One of the tools that both CEC and COMESE, based in Brussels, have to address the EU institutions are the meetings that are organized within the context of the rotating EU presidencies. In this frame, the war and the mediating role of churches in conflict have been topics of discussion since February 2022. My colleague Marek has been actively working on these aspects. Further, in the last 2 years, in most of the Article 17 seminars and high-level meetings of religious leaders at the European Commission, the topic of the war and different aspects have been there, and CEC offered representatives from the member churches and different partners to address some of these aspects and challenges raised because of the war, and to analyze different aspects of the current problem we are facing. Together with ecumenical partners and also the Christian world communions, we organized and participated in online events and global prayers for peace in Ukraine and elsewhere. I think I would like to mention maybe 2 important steps in the process of developing this program. One moment of discussing or opening the conversation on just peace on the European level was last year in Warsaw, last December, where we brought together around 80 Ukrainian and other European church leaders, officers, and academic scholars to discuss just peace in Ukraine. And there we really wanted to hear from Ukrainian Christians, from the churches, especially about the right to protect and the right to self-defense, and to have a conversation on the real experiences on the ground and the hopes of churches for the future. And there we were very honored to have Father Roman Fihas with us, from the director of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, and also Father Ihor Shaban from the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And of course, we are continuing to build our cooperation. As a follow-up of that event, we are now organizing an ecumenical conference in December with the title Resisting Empire, Promoting Peace, Churches Confront the Russian World Ideology. And this is an event that is organized by CEC in cooperation with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland and the Orthodox Church of Finland. And the aim here is to bring together leaders from the different European churches, officers and academics to discuss the ideological roots of the Russian world narrative and also its use in justifying imperial aggression. Part of our plans is to come together with COMESE for a solidarity visit in Ukraine and We need to talk more about that and plan in the next weeks and months. And part of our plans for the future is also to continue to facilitate on the European level the discussion on just peace and explore also questions of security and defense from a church perspective. These are very much questions that are being discussed in all the European churches at the moment, and what kind of consultative role should the churches have with regards to their governments. And more importantly, one of the concrete plans is to work more closely with our Ukrainian partners. And in this context, we are now starting 2 projects. The one is developed together with the Institute of Ecumenical Studies. And the title of this project is Ecclesiology through the Lens of Church History, Educational Prospects for Inter-Church Cooperation. And here we are looking to examine ecumenically and redefine the foundational course of church history in 6 seminaries that are represented through 3 major Christian traditions in Ukraine: Baptist, Greek Catholic, and Orthodox. And why church history? Because this is a course that everyone has, and this is where the ideas of how the other is seen, the other as a church, the other Christian is seen. So we want to actually examine critically what is the construction of the other in these 3 traditions and offer some new vision, ecumenical vision around that. And another concrete project we are now starting is with another organization in Ukraine, Theology in Action. And this is developed together with Dialogue in Action, an NGO based in Kiev. This is a series of workshops that foster an inclusive community through relational healing and collective action for justice and social renewal. And also the aim here is to contribute to the shaping of a participatory and just vision for Ukraine. I want to stop here and to really thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion.
Дуже сердечно дякую.
Thank you, Katerina, for the introduction, for your warm words, and probably I will just briefly sum up everything that you have outlined, the key tasks that you have set, the development of relations, recovery of religious infrastructure, theological revision and rethinking. And we also learned about very concrete steps that you plan to take and that you are actually taking. What is of great interest are the projects on the history of church. Of course, I'm really keen on that because I know that this is not an accident that you will have this collaboration and partnership with the Ukrainian Catholic University because of the importance of the topic. And now I would like to give the floor to a well-known person, a friend of ours, Reverend Manuel Enrique Barrios Prieto, Monsignor, who is a General Secretary of the Commission of Commis, and he is a true friend of ours because Monsignor visited Ukraine. We had a privilege of visiting Commis office in Brussels. It's a great pleasure that you are present here with us at this session. And of course, I hope that there will be another opportunity for us to see each other during the visit that Katerina has just mentioned. Monsignor Prieto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Also for me, I'll try to speak slowly because I know that for interpreters it's easier, and unfortunately I couldn't send the text before because we have been working on the intervention in this seminar with Marek. Marek is with us now, Marek Misak. He's from Slovakia, and he is in COMESE, the Commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union, our policy advisor for external action. So he is responsible to follow the policies of the European Union outside the European Union. And so he's been very much involved in these last years in the war in Ukraine. So I wanted him to be with us today so he can also explain how COMES is working on this issue, also from an ecumenical perspective. So I don't know if I can share my screen. Is that possible?
Yes.
Very good. So I'll share my screen just because it might be easier.
Just a moment.
Do you see it?
Not yet. Yeah. Można?
That's it. Yes, that's it. It's just a text. Huh? So we were planning in this short 15 minutes that we have, I will speak about the mission of COMESE. What is COMESE? Because sometimes it's not very well known, and I think it's good to give an introduction of what we are and our work. Then I'll also speak shortly about the ecumenical aspects of the work of COMESE and the effects on the war, on this ecumenical perspective we have at COMESE. I will speak about our relations with KEK. Katerina's here and she's a friend. Speak also with the relations with Sprokale, the representation of the Orthodox here in Brussels. I'll speak a bit of our relations with the Anglican Church. Article 17 dialogue. Already Carolina mentioned a bit about this, which is very important for us in our dialogue with the European institutions. Then we have a good contact also with KEK, with the Interparliamentary Assembly of Orthodoxy. I think some of you might know it. It's an entity with which we've been in contact in the last years. And it's important for COMESE. And then, if possible, I explain a bit the difference with CCEE. So CCEE is the other body of the Catholic Church in Europe. CCEE stands for the Council of the Bishops' Conferences of Europe. So it gathers together all the bishops' conferences of Europe. It includes also, strangely, Russia. It includes Turkey, and it includes all of Europe. And CCE has a more pastoral sort of perspective. If you want, well, I'll go through this. If you want, CCE is really the partner for ecumenical dialogue for the Catholic Church in Europe. Then Marek, third point, Marek will speak about the war in Ukraine and how COMESE has reacted to this. What have we done? What are we doing? And maybe at the end I'll suggest some ways of going forward in fostering ecumenism, a just and stable peace in our continent, in Europe, and a stronger EU in the world, which I think is very important in this moment of geopolitical change. So going to the beginning, to point one. What is COMESE? So COMESE stands for the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union. So we gather together the bishops' conferences of the European Union, not of all Europe, only of the European Union. How do we do this? Every bishop conference of the European Union appoints one bishop delegate for COMESE. In that way, we have the representation of the different bishops' conferences of the European Union. These bishops gather together twice a year in a plenary assembly. And why is Comesse, for what reason was Comesse created? It was created to maintain a dialogue between the Catholic Church and the European Union. So the role of Comesse, of the Commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union, is more a political role. We are involved in following European policies, in having a dialogue with the European Union, in representing the Church in the European Union before the institutions. We are an official representation of the Church, and to maintain a dialogue with the European Union. And when we can, to intervene also in policy making, to contribute to policy making. So our role is a very peculiar role that we have as an entity of the Catholic Church, because the European Union only exists in Europe. And so the Church created this body, this organization, Comesse, to monitor, to follow the European Union, the process of European integration. And the day-to-day work of Comesse is done through a secretariat that we have here in Brussels. I'm the Secretary General. I'm a Catholic priest from Spain. And then there are persons in our secretariat that work on different policy areas. Marek, for example, that is with us today, he follows, as I told you, the external affairs of the EU. So that's for the mission of Comesse. Our ecumenical Comesse and ecumenism, we could call this. How is Comesse involved in ecumenism? I personally I've been very involved in ecumenism because I have worked for 10 years in the Spanish Bishop Conference, and I was the director of the Office for Ecumenism and Interreligious Dialogue. That was my job in the Spanish Bishop Conference. So for many years, I have followed ecumenical issues. I've been to meetings of the World Council of Churches. I've met with KEC also as representative of the Spanish Bishop Conference in the past. So personally, I'm very involved in ecumenism. I find this a very important task also for the Catholic Church today. And even with the Catholic Church is a majority, maybe more there than in other places. In Comesse, though, and this I have to say, we work ecumenically in a different way. We are not involved in ecumenical dialogue directly, because we are involved in having a dialogue with the European institutions. But in some way, ecumenism is part of our work because we try to do this together. We try to advocate together before the EU, together with our ecumenical partners. And I am always of the idea that what we can do together with KEC, with Croqueo, also with the Interparliamentary Assembly of Orthodoxy, we should do together. Even with this, sometimes it's more difficult. Sometimes we don't agree on everything. But what we can do together, we should try to do together. So we have very good relations with KEC. The Secretary General was in our plenary assembly last week. He updated us on the work of KEC. I'm also invited to the meetings of KEC. So we have a very, very close relation. Croqueo now maybe is in a more difficult situation. Croqueo is the representation of the Orthodox churches here in Brussels. Now it mainly represents the Romanian Orthodox Church. But also obviously we have with Croqueo also some relations with the Anglicans as well. You know that the Orthodox and the Anglicans are also part of KEC. But but sometimes they want to also act independently. And so we have relations with them. Article 17 was mentioned by Katerina. It's an article in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, an article of the Treaty of Lisbon, that establishes that there has to be a dialogue between the churches and the European Union. It's something very special, if you want, because it doesn't exist in other countries normally. So the European Union is obliged, according to this article, to maintain a dialogue with us, with the churches. And we implement this article through different meetings. So this is also in some sense ecumenical, not because we dialogue between churches, because as churches we dialogue together with the European Union. And this is important. So it's an instrument we have to advocate, to maintain a dialogue with the European Union. Then we have had contacts lately with the Interparliamentary Assembly. This is very important also in relation to the war, because you know that the Interparliamentary Assembly also had before MPs from Russia. Now they're not anymore members of the Interparliamentary Assembly. That has created some tensions. With the Interparliamentary Assembly, we're working very much on trying to foster Christian values in the European Union. And my last point before I leave the word to Marek, this difference with CCE. Well, I already told you what CCE is. It's the other body of the Catholic Church in Europe. It's the main body for ecumenical dialogue. In fact, we're going to sign now in November in Rome a new version of the Carta Ecumenica. And the persons that are going to sign this document are the president of CEC and the president of CCE, mainly. So CCE is the main body for ecumenical dialogue in Europe. Those who work very much together, and I think this is going to be important now. As you know, yesterday has been confirmed that Pope Francis will travel to Istanbul and Lebanon now at the end of November, also to celebrate the anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. And CC is very much involved in this, and in some way also us. Okay, I'll leave it here and leave to Marek now to enter more concretely in our work in relation to the war in Ukraine and our work also under an ecumenical perspective. So, Marek, I leave you the floor.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy to see.
I'll leave the sharing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, happy to see you too, and happy to see so many dear friends on the screen who are in the room. And I'm also very sad that I cannot be with you today, but I also very much hope that soon there will be an occasion that we can soon meet again. So yeah, I would like just to refer maybe to some concrete initiatives that COMECE has undertaken with regard to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And indeed, COMECE has actually been accompanying the situation at the EU's eastern border already well before the full-scale invasion started. For example, during the review of the European neighborhood policy in the year 2015, but then also later during the review of the European Union's policy with the Eastern Partnership, that was in the year 2020, COMECE in its contributions highlighted the important role also of peace building, of putting security high on the agenda of these EU strategic frameworks. And even a few days before the full-scale invasion started, it was in January 2022 that the then president of COMECE, Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, issued a strong statement expressing his concerns that indeed a military invasion could start, and this would have catastrophic consequences, of course, for Ukraine, but also put at risk the peaceful order, the peace architecture in Europe and globally. And unfortunately, indeed, a few days later, this worry has materialized. So since the 24th of February 2022, the war in Ukraine has really become a top priority, a key issue on the agenda of COMECE when it comes especially to this area of EU external relations. We have issued a number of statements at different levels, at the level of the bishops, through the assembly of COMECE, through the presidency, the standing committee of COMECE, and also at the level of the secretariat of COMECE. And I will now try to summarize the key messages that we try to include in our statements. Of course, in the first place, a very clear distinction between the aggressor and the victim. And we knew that this is also something that is very important to the local churches in Ukraine, to call the aggressor by name, Russian Federation, and to call the victim by name, Ukraine. And this is something that we always try to emphasize and make it very clear in our statements. And then, of course, the pertinent demand was directed towards the aggressor to stop the hostilities, to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, to withdraw from the territory of Ukraine. And then the other demand, and as also Father Manuel mentioned, of course, our main audience, our main interlocutor is the European Union. So the other demand was directed towards the European Union and, of course, the broader international community to show concrete gestures of solidarity with the victim, with Ukraine, financial, economic, humanitarian, political, diplomatic, but also military. So that was also very much has been present in our statements in view of supporting the rights of Ukraine of self-defense. And of course, in the very clear understanding that Ukraine is not only defending its people and its territory, but it is also defending Europe and European values. Of course, we have been also very clear in our advocacy messaging towards a just, comprehensive and lasting peace, one that would be in line with international law, and that would also allow Ukrainian families to reunite and to live a life in security, freedom, and dignity in their sovereign and independent homeland. Another important advocacy message in our statements has always been, as also Father Manuel and before Katerina said, the support for the European integration of Ukraine, that we also believe is part of the European family and that needs to also be supported on its path towards a future membership. And an important element on this way towards a future EU membership will, of course, be reconstruction of the destroyed infrastructure. And here also a very clear demand that the aggressor should adequately participate in these reconstruction efforts. What is maybe interesting is that some bishops that form the Assembly of COMECE, and these bishops that come especially from countries that have certain presence of a Russian-speaking minority, they suggested that we should also include in our statements some wording with regard to the Russian-speaking community in Ukraine, more in view of, let's say, this difficult and long-term path of reconciliation. So that, we insist that, of course, the rights of all the communities in Ukraine are upheld and protected, and that the social fabric of the Ukrainian society is restored also in that long-term perspective of reconciliation. But in general, I can say that there has been a very strong sense of unity among EU bishops when it comes to the messaging on the war in Ukraine, and also quite a clarity. So it has been, the statements have been quite clear. And for this, we have also received a number of compliments from different places, different actors, especially with regard also to the statement that we issued in March this year. That was a statement of the COMECE presidency. And really, as COMECE, we felt the need to, again, reiterate the basic facts. Who is the aggressor? Who is the victim? And what is needed? Because you remember March and before February was the time when also through the new US administration, some confusion and complexity was brought into the facts, into the factual situation, and there was indeed some confusion. So that's why also from the COMECE point of view, we found it very important again to reiterate with a very clear language the realities of this aggression. Besides the statements, maybe I would also refer to another initiative that COMECE did, and that can also be interesting for the discussion that we have today, is that the then president of COMECE, Cardinal Hollerich, wrote in March 2022, so indeed just a few days after the start of the full-scale invasion, he wrote a letter to the Patriarch Kirill of the Moscow Patriarchate on behalf of COMECE, of the bishops of COMECE, and in this letter, which you can also find online on the website of COMECE, Cardinal Hollerich was asking Patriarch Kirill to intercede with the Russian leadership, with the political authorities, in order to stop the hostilities and to show goodwill for negotiations. And interestingly, COMECE also received an answer from the Moscow Patriarchate, and you can see this answer also online on the website of COMECE. The answer didn't come directly from the Patriarch himself, but from the then chairman of the Department of External Church Relations, Metropolitan Hilarion, who, in a way tried to justify the position of the Russian Orthodox Church about the war in Ukraine. And he was referring to the need of reopening channels of dialogue, of official, unofficial dialogue. And he indeed deplored the breakdown in relations between the West and Russia, but still referred to a certain potential to reestablish these channels of dialogue. But then, of course, we perceived the statements, the actions of the Russian Patriarchate when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And of course, as was mentioned already before by previous speakers, these statements and actions of the Russian Patriarchate have indeed cast shadows of doubt about the sincerity, credibility of their intentions, and indeed coherence with the Christian witness. Maybe on the positive side, of course, among this tragedy of war, but what we can see positively at COMECE is the strengthening of relations with the Catholic Church, and with the churches in large, but especially with the Catholic Church in Ukraine. Since the full-scale invasion, and especially also since Ukraine has received the candidate status for a future EU membership, COMECE has admitted both the Roman Catholic as well as the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine as an observer to our plenary assembly, and also at an expert level, representatives of both rites, of the Latin and Oriental Rite, are invited to join our working bodies, our commissions. So indeed, there is now a very close contact, a very close collaboration also with both churches in Ukraine, and we have also been very warmly welcomed, as it was already mentioned in Lviv earlier this year in July. The COMECE leadership, the president, Monsignor Crociata, Father Manuel, and myself, we went to Lviv and met different stakeholders. We were very kindly hosted by both rites, by the Roman Catholics and the Greek Catholics, and we also had the immense joy to visit the Ukrainian Catholic University. One more point, maybe also in terms of ecumenical relations. Indeed, I would also confirm what Katerina said before, that in this context of the war in Ukraine, our relations with KEC have even further intensified. We have indeed issued a number of joint statements on the occasions of Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, expressing our clear sign of solidarity. There have been also some joint visits, and indeed some joint visits, ecumenical visits, are planned also for the future. We are currently discussing these possibilities of both ways, so of going together as COMECE and KEC to Ukraine, but also again to invite an ecumenical delegation from Ukraine to come to Brussels to again facilitate this dialogue with the institutions of the European Union. And here I will then just say a few words how we perceive this interaction with the European Union, because of course that is our main mission here in Brussels, to facilitate dialogue, to engage in a dialogue with the European Union institutions. And here I can say that so far we have experienced a great willingness and open doors from the side of the European Union to hear our voice, to receive us, and to receive delegations from Ukraine. We hosted, for example, the Major Archbishop Sviatoslav Shevchuk we hosted here also different representatives of the Greek Catholic Church, Father Igor Shaban and others, as well as also from the Latin Church. And we have, facilitated for them meetings with different representatives of the European Commission, the European Parliament. And these have always been very good occasions to mention very concrete needs, humanitarian needs, societal needs. We heard really these sad stories about traumas, about psychological, psychosocial needs, about concrete needs in terms of help to the refugees, to the affected communities. And also in this sense, we have seen a very strong will from the side of the European Union to listen and to also undertake actions. Maybe where we saw Europe a bit absent, it's the diplomatic arena, where, of course, we had to wait for the US president that some dynamics have come into the negotiations. Also there, Europe rather played, let's say, or remained in a second row, but this maybe has to do with larger questions when it comes to Europe's capacity or lack of capacity currently to influence and to shape global developments. So here I would maybe stop, and I don't know if Father Manuel wants maybe to say a final word from Comese. Thank you.
Дякую, Марek.
My final word is to return if you can see the last point, to return a bit to the title of this meeting, Way Forward to Foster Ecumenism, a Just and Stable Peace and a Stronger EU in the World. So it's very short what I want to say. I'm going to just read it so it's easier also for the interpreters. So the basic position of Comese is to support the European integration process. This has been something that started after the Second World War in Europe. Europe became united, first with smaller countries, then it's been expanding itself. In 2004, there was the big enlargement of the EU. One fell out, Brexit, the United Kingdom. But we support the European integration process. And as you know, the founding fathers of the European Union, many were Christians, and two of them are in a process of beatification, Schumann and de Gasperi. So the support of the European integration process. And as Marek said before, in this, we also support that this process of integration has to enlarge itself, and it should include all the countries that form part of the European family, including Ukraine. And this is something on which we advocate strongly here in the European Union. So we support a strong Europe. This is a second point, that can defend and promote its values, the founding values of the European Union, like human rights, freedom, democracy, solidarity, the dignity of the human person, etc., which for us are values that are based in the Christian tradition. But to do this, and this is something that we're seeing now very clearly, to do this, the European Union has to strengthen itself. It's losing ground in the international sphere. Even if it's the third largest market, even if it's economically it's very strong, but it has to strengthen itself, mainly in defense and in competitiveness. These are the priorities for the European Union in this time. So, Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union.
Monsignor Prieto, excuse me, because we really have a problem with the time. Maybe you can summarize your speech because of another our speakers doesn't have more time.
I will leave it here. I will leave it here because I can obviously, as priest, you know that we can speak a lot. So
I know that.
I will leave it here so to leave some time for questions that I think is always the most interesting part of these meetings. So thank you very much. So I'm very happy to be here with you. So very happy, also looking forward to questions or reactions or whatever.
Excuse me for interruption, but very,
No,
thank you for
I
your
understand
presentation.
it because-
And I also thank you, Marek, for your thesis and some aspects which you stress in your words. Я тоді вертаюсь.
All right, so I'm switching back to my native Ukrainian language. I will not do any summaries because we will still perhaps discuss some of the aspects about the activities of COMESA and Conference of European Churches and the difference between them. I think one important aspect that was mentioned by Marek Misek, the secretary of COMESA, is the topic of the crisis of ecumenical relationship, because for now we have only heard about how well these institutions work, and we know that this is true, but we know that there are also some pressing problems that stem back from the past and that probably require rethinking of the dialogue that we had previously, because Ilarion suggests going back to the old model. Perhaps it was comfortable and convenient to him. So it's not fortuitous. So giving the floor to my colleague, Anatoly Babensky, I still hope that in the two next reports, we will hear more about the crisis and about how this crisis could be approached and what could be our contribution.
Today with us, we have Dr. Anatoly Babinsky, lecturer and research fellow at the Institute of Church History, Ukrainian Catholic Church. Can you hear me? Well, yes. Well, probably it's going to be slightly confusing because we had a communication breakdown as Led Zeppelin thinks, and probably I will switch to my not very good English, but actually I want to say that my report will be about the Vatican and crisis of ecumenical relations. It is really connected to what Marek has raised when they wanted to send the letter to the Patriarch Kirill, and they received the response that they received. Yes, that was their reply. So I will focus on the Ukrainian perspective. So I will analyze the key topics. I will share the information that probably is known to you, the Ukrainian perspective, how to assess it, and then I will make an attempt to take it from the Vatican's perspective. I am not the representative of the Vatican, however, I have an intention to do that, and then I will summarize everything.
From the Vatican's perspective, in the context of our region, Ukraine and Eastern Europe more broadly, it is no secret that it has never been separated from politics. More than elsewhere, here the issues of interchurch relations have always been intersected with questions of geopolitics, national identity, and state interests. One may wonder whether Rome wanted to be it that way, but it is evident that it had not to consider the circumstances dictated by reality. Therefore, every change in the political landscape, from the fall of the communism to Russia's wars against Ukraine, has automatically affected ecumenical processes. To briefly summarize where we stand now, the situation can be outlined as follows. On the one hand, relations between Rome and the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople remain active, and indeed one could say that in recent years they have even intensified. This is connected both with the fact that Constantinople has shown over the past decades perhaps the greatest ecumenical interest among all the local churches and is ready to take concrete steps toward restoring Christian unity. In my view, it is also related to internal Orthodox dynamics. The period following the Council of Crete, which exposed the main crisis of the Orthodox world, its internal divisions and the loss of even visible unity of the Orthodox Church in the singular, prompted Fanar to exercise more active leadership. This was manifested, among other things, in its attempt to resolve the long-standing schism in Ukraine. Effective and comprehensible remedies were proposed. How the various parties to the Ukrainian schism made use of them is another matter. But the very fact of this initiative had consequences not only for Ukrainian Orthodoxy, but also for the field of ecumenism. The situation today with the Moscow Patriarchate is entirely different. The dialogue that was once one of the key directions of the Vatican's ecumenical engagement has now been reduced, in essence, to minimum. After all, it is hardly possible to describe the current context as authentic ecumenism, in the sense of seeking unity. Rather, they are sporadic encounters devoid of theological and ecclesial substance. And tellingly, the dicastery for promoting Christian unity, which should serve as a central coordinator of such processes, now plays no noticeable role in communication with Moscow. This indicates that the remaining contacts operate primarily through diplomatic rather than ecclesial channels. The official Joint International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church, though formally continuing its work, is in fact experiencing the evident crisis. Several local Orthodox churches have declined to participate in the dialogue altogether, while the Moscow Patriarchate systematically avoids those meetings where the Ecumenical Patriarchate presides. In this case, the issue lies not so much or not only in the establishment of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine or the ongoing war, but rather in Moscow's evident dissatisfaction with the very agenda and the direction of the Commission's work. Furthermore, the establishment of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has introduced a new factor that has fundamentally reshaped the balance of the ecclesiastical landscape in Eastern Europe. In a region where the Moscow Patriarchate had previously served as the Vatican's principal interlocutor, a new actor has now emerged, the OCU. At present, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine does not participate in the official international dialogues between the Catholic and Orthodox churches and lacks direct formal channels of communication with the Holy See. Nevertheless, a growing mutual interest is observable, both on the part of the OCU and the Vatican, manifested in rather some visits and meetings. Whether this reflects the OCU's genuine ecumenical commitment or its strategic pursuit of international legitimacy, or most likely both simultaneously, remains an open question. This situation also exposes the Vatican's strategic bind. Recognizing the OCU risks further alienating Moscow, a staunch opponent of Orthodox autocephaly in Ukraine, yet ignoring it would mean disregarding both ecclesial choice of millions of Ukrainian faithful and the canonical decision of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. In any case, this development continues a new ecclesial and geopolitical reality with which the Vatican must now reckon. It is evident that when addressing the crisis in ecumenical relations within the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine, the central focus becomes the dialogue between Rome and the Moscow Patriarchate. Historically, this engagement has commanded the lion's share of the Vatican's ecumenical efforts. This is understandable. Moscow represents one of the largest Orthodox churches in the world. Its influence extends beyond its so-called canonical boundaries, and some may have genuinely believed that the keys to Orthodox dialogue Orthodox Catholic dialogue lay in Moscow's hands. As a Ukrainian Catholic, I have naturally maintained a degree of skepticism toward these efforts. The skepticism was particularly pronounced during the Cold War, when the Ukrainian community felt profoundly betrayed by the Vatican's dialogue with Moscow, largely overlooked the suffering of Ukrainians and failed to account for real conditions of the underground church in Ukraine. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it remained somewhat unclear why bilateral relations between Moscow, which the Vatican undoubtedly had a very right to pursue, also encompassed Ukrainian concerns. Why were these issues not disentangled? Why did Ukrainian matters remain bundled with the Moscow-centric framework, as if ecclesial reality on the ground had not fundamentally changed? Doubt regarding the very nature of this dialogue is further reinforced by the recent historical research. For instance, Roman Skakun's study of the Russian Orthodox episcopate in Ukraine after the Second World War reveals a striking reality. Virtually the entire episcopate were all like 100%, were agents of the KGB. Not merely compromised individuals acting under the duress, but active collaborators in constructing an intelligence apparatus within the church itself. It has long been researched that the Russian Orthodox Church functioned as an instrument of Soviet foreign policy. Even against this well-established backdrop, recent archival evidence reveals institutional compromise exceeding previous assumptions. The sheer weight of this evidence underscores the extent to which this dialogue between Rome and Moscow was shaped by hidden motives within the Russian Orthodox hierarchy, calling into question its sincerity and authenticity. However, if we try to step back from the subjective Ukrainian perspective as much as possible and attempt to understand the rationale of the Vatican, two key questions emerge that are directly relevant to our situation. First, could ecumenical dialogue with the Moscow Patriarchate have helped prevent the war? And second, how to conduct dialogue with the Church that blessed the war? The latter question concerns the future, and I will leave it for now. I will focus on the former, since this is the root of the crisis. The Vatican has traditionally positioned itself as a diplomat and peacemaker, striving to maintain channels of communication even with difficult partners. From this perspective, dialogue with Moscow could have been intended to preserve the possibility of influencing a highly complex regional situation, one that has always been exceptionally challenging for the Holy See. East Central Europe lies at the crossroads of two major Christian traditions, Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and carries deep historical wounds, unresolved conflicts, and collective traumas. These factors may make the region not only politically sensitive, but also religiously and culturally intricate, where any ecclesial initiative is inevitably intertwined with the local identities, historical memory, and geopolitical considerations. In addition to this, complexity is further compounded by the imperial nature of both the Russian state and the Russian Orthodox Church, the latter having explicitly embraced ideas such as a Holy Rus, which sacralize territorial expansion. In this context, the Vatican's interaction with Moscow can be seen as an attempt to mitigate the situation in the region, whose stability directly affects European stability as a whole, without legitimizing Moscow's claims. I would argue that this was also a realistic objective of ecumenical contacts with the Moscow Patriarchate. Beyond all the aspirational rhetoric about desired unity, reconciliation, it appears that the Vatican sought a gradual transformation of the Moscow Patriarchate, aiming to integrate it more fully into various forms of interaction, scholarly exchanges, cultural initiatives, and multilateral theological commissions. In essence, this approach mirrors the strategies pursued by Western states toward Russia after the Cold War, attempting to moderate aggressive tendencies through integration into a network of economic, political, and cultural engagement. Based on these assumptions, the interdependence breeds moderation. Similarly, the Vatican's engagement can be seen as an effort to channel the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church toward constructive participation in broad international and ecclesiastical networks, thereby potentially reducing the Church's isolationist and expansionist impulses. Like its secular counterpart, the strategy rested on the assumption about institutional incentives and the transformative power of engagement that would ultimately prove unfounded. Let us add that some in the Vatican may indeed have believed that Moscow was open to discussing the issue of restoring unity. I will leave this question open, since the highest representatives, such as already mentioned Hilarion Alfeyev, have repeatedly stated that this area doesn't interest them. The fundamental flaw in this approach was a profound misreading of Moscow Patriarchate's institutional identity and its relationship to Russian state power. The Vatican strategy assumed that the Russian Orthodox Church would act according to the logic similar to that of other Christian institutions, that it could be integrated into European framework of inter-Christian collaboration aimed at peaceful coexistence, and that sustained engagement would strengthen voices within the Moscow Patriarchate committed to common Christian values over nationalist and chauvinistic tendencies. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong. First, the Moscow Patriarchate was never an independent ecclesial actor capable of being transformed through dialogue. The historical evidence, particularly the archival research of KGB infiltration, demonstrate that the Church has functioned as an extension of Russian state power since the Soviet period. And this relationship did not fundamentally change after the 1991. The Church's leadership was not seeking integration into international Christian networks as a path toward theological renewal or institutional reform. Rather, it instrumentalized these contexts to enhance Russia's soft power and legitimacy. Ecumenical dialogue from Moscow's perspective was never about genuine theological exchange, but about securing recognition, prestige, and leverage for Russian geopolitical objectives. Secondly, the Vatican somewhat underestimated how central opposition to the West is to Russian Orthodoxy self-identification. Concepts such as holy ruse are not merely nationalist sentiments that could be moderated through exposure to alternative perspectives. They constitute a totalizing theological political framework that casts Moscow as a guardian of authentic Christianity against the decadent West. Within this worldview, Rome itself represents spiritual corruption, and any engagement with it is a tactical, rather transformative. I will shorten a bit. Third, the strategy of gradual transformation through institutional integration suffers from a temporal mismatch. Even if such an approach could theoretically work, it would require decades for sustained engagement to show results, far longer than the political and military timelines within which aggressive states operate. By the time any moderating influence might have taken effect, Russia had already launched its war. Fourth, the Vatican's engagement inadvertently legitimized the Moscow Patriarchate's claims to ecclesiastical jurisdiction over Ukraine. By treating Moscow as a primary Orthodox interlocutor for the entire region, the Vatican reinforced the very imperial ecclesiology it sought to moderate. This became painfully evident when the Ukrainian Orthodox schism required a resolution. The Vatican found itself constrained by years of having implicitly accepted Moscow's framework for understanding Eastern European church relations. The eventual recognition of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine by Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Vatican's reluctance to respond in a fraternal way when millions of Orthodox Ukrainians were finally freed from canonical isolation and stigma of being treated as non-Christians revealed how deeply the Holy See had boxed itself in through its Moscow-centric approach. And the last one, and perhaps most importantly, the strategy rested on a categorical error regarding what ecumenical dialogue can actually achieve. Dialogue is effective only when the parties share basic commitments to truthfulness, good faith engagement, and possibility of mutual transformation. But when one party regards dialogue primarily as a tactical instrument for advancing geopolitical objectives, the entire framework collapses. The Vatican, at least officially, treated Moscow Patriarchate as if it were a church genuinely striving for church unity, for Christian unity. Moscow, by contrast, treated the Vatican as a geopolitical actor with its own interest, an interlocutor to be bargained with, not a partner in pursuit of truth and justice. These fundamentally incompatible understandings meant that dialogue never truly took place. And I think that the response of Metropolitan Ilarion Alfeyev is very, it is a good example in this case. So the crisis I outlined in the title maybe of my paper, Unity About Truth, is precisely what the failure of Rome-Moscow dialogue has exposed. I will stop here, okay?
Дякую дуже. Дякую, Анатолію.
Це все. Thank you, Anatoly. And I would like to pass the floor to Taras Kurelets, a research fellow of the UCU Institute of Ecumenical Studies. From what we have already discussed, probably Taras will continue this discussion about the ecumenical crisis and to build on the assumptions which have already been presented, taking, for example, the Council of Churches.
Glory to Jesus Christ. So I'm quite pressed for time, but my advantage is that yesterday Miroslav Marinovich set a general frame of directions about the crisis, and also he showed the direction to move forward in order to resolve the crisis. So I would like to mention some general tendencies. And since a lot of topics were mentioned yesterday, I would just like to focus my attention on the activities of the World Council of Churches. But the conclusions that I draw are of more of a general significance. So the topic of my report is the need to rebuild the old architecture of international ecumenical relations through the prism of the war in Ukraine. So what was this former architecture about? Moscow was one of the centers of gravity for the global ecumenical movement, and dialogue with the Christian East was built through it, with Moscow and through Moscow. At least it's considered the largest Orthodox church all across the globe, 70 million of faithful. And this is what many partners of the ecumenical movement believed in. It has a rich spiritual tradition and so on and so forth. It was listened to and its stance was reckoned with in many cases. Moscow Patriarchate, starting in 1961, had a broad ecumenical activity. It was the member of the World Council of Churches, and even before that, it led other dialogues. But you have to mention that Moscow's character of participation was quite specific. First of all, it was a prerogative of the hierarchy and specific priests, and this ecumenical openness did not extend to the lower churches. So mostly on the lower levels, it was anti-ecumenical. Second, the issues raised by the ROC for discussion were a continuation of the USSR state policy, at least at the World Council of Churches. Therefore, some historians rightfully believe that it was Khrushchev who pushed the management of the ROC to join the WCC. And when in the early 1990s, freedom of religion emerged on the ruins of the Soviet Union, Russian Orthodox Church once again brought its usual anti-ecumenism to the fore with the accusations of ecumenical heresy. Being heard, the hierarchy's justification was that it was Khrushchev's who had forced them to do so. Why did Khrushchev do this? First of all, for image effect, the participation of the representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church in the World Council of Churches was a testification to the freedom of conscience in the USSR. Secondly, ideological goal. Through official clergy, the Soviet authorities sought to influence international Christian circles, persuading them to take a pro-peace and anti-Western stance. Soviet Union was also always a country fighting for peace in the entire world. So the ROC was acting more towards promoting their narratives, and finally control over church diplomacy that was conducted by the KGB. If you think back to the young bishop Kirill Hulayev, he started as the official representative of ROC in Geneva. Nonetheless, since then, ROC had and still has its representatives at the World Council of Churches, and it continues to engage in the dialogue that I would refer to as political ecclesiastic dialogue, because it does not really meet the criteria of the term ecumenical. But the war that came to pass made us think about the course of this ecumenical dialogue and whether it could carry on like this. So the explosion of the large-scale invasion of Russia against Ukraine changed everything, and the issue was raised whether the grounds of this dialogue should be upheld. And the ROC was compromised. I'm talking about ROC as the institution, not the clerical structure. So the reactions are quite very different. Sometimes some believe that ROC should be excluded from the World Council of Churches, such as former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, but many would like to carry on with the dialogue in the format of business as usual. So dialogue at any sake. I think that such attempts could be tolerated if the ROC hasn't been compromised in this war, if it didn't use the rhetoric that openly supports the war, if it at least spoke as if the external witness, and if it upheld more of a neutral position. But ROC never did this either. So in our case, this need disappears. There's no need to preserve this dialogue at any price, because ROC is on the open pathway to war. And Russia is on the position of metaphysical good. And in a different document, if you remember, the Russian patriarch, through the council that he headed, in a document called an order, he said that this was a holy war into Ukraine. So this exacerbated the problem even further. Now, getting to the World Council of Churches and its response to the war in Ukraine. So this response cannot be appraised unanimously because there are various nuances there, but you can see many elements of the old paradigm, business as usual. So prior to the beginning of war on January 25th, 2022, WCC issued an urgent call for peace for the people of Ukraine, calling for de-escalation and dialogue rather than threats. Then the delegation of World Council of Churches and ACT Alliance visited Ukraine, Hungary, Romania, and Russia. They were there in order to assess the humanitarian situation with the refugees. There was a great hope that on September 9th, 2022, when 11th Assembly of World Council of Churches took place, that assembles once in 7 to 8 years. It's quite a significant event for the activities of World Council of Churches. So there was a hope that something could be done and eyes could be opened in terms of what was really happening. But things went the other ways and hopes were not met. There were calls to expel the church, Russian Orthodox Church, for their open support of war against Ukraine. But WCC said the dialogue cannot be upheld when people are ousted. And there was also an invitation to the delegation of Ukrainian churches, because prior to that, Ukrainian churches as a separate unit never participated in the World Council of Churches or other institutions. Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine participated, Ukrainian Orthodox Church participated as the part of Russian Church. Luckily, a European Council of Churches and other institutions supported us, but the World Council of Churches still upholds its tendencies that it used to have when they see Moscow in the center of ecumenical activities. But I think that this could take a different turn. So the presence of their delegation at the 11th General Assembly, it was in a way equated by the two delegates from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. They had 2 minutes to say something, while, of course, the representatives of Russian Orthodox Church were just walking around and sharing propaganda. So it was not really an equilibrium of any kind, mildly speaking. So this tradition is in place since 2015. when during the events in Crimea and the invasion in Crimea in 2014, the World Council of Churches reacted only 1 year later. And there was also a message published. Delegation listened to different points of view about the conflict in any way. The delegation is sure about the potential of the churches and communities of Ukraine in order to play its role against the radical communities. So this statement was about Ukrainian nationalism provoking Russian aggression. Of course, this was not the intention of delegation, but its visit to Ukraine was used to spread narratives that they wanted to spread across the world through World Council of Churches. The first signals appeared only after the escalation of the war in February 22, and some of them were even worse than in 2015. For example, in response to a request from Ukraine's First Lady to the WCC to become a moral and active ally of Ukraine, the then acting General Secretary Ioan Sauca from Romania, who the letter was addressed to, published his own letter to both President Zelensky and President Putin. What it said was, there is sufficient suffering and despair on both sides, and everyone is waiting for the conflict to end. Your eminences, at the end of the conflict and an agreement on a peaceful solution are entirely on your hands. Before your people and history, you will be the solely responsible for this. No one from outside can decide or try to impose any solution to this brotherly conflict. So this letter, as you can imagine, caused outrage not only in Ukraine, but also in some ecumenical circles, which were trying to exert pressure. And as a result, Reverend Ioan published a new letter, this time addressed to Patriarch Kirill. And this time the letter was closer to the reality of things. The WCC explained its desire to keep the Russian Orthodox Church in the organization and welcomed it in the General Assembly, given the need for dialogue. However, according to the relevant information published on the official website of the Department for External Church Relations of the Moscow Patriarchate, the Russians used these meetings to promote narratives and interpretations of the war that corresponded to Kremlin propaganda. Therefore, we can see how similarly to other cases, we can see how political leaders are much ahead in terms of understanding the war. Its reasons and consequences are much ahead of church leaders. Church leaders, for some reason, experience much more inertia. And then during the General Assembly in Karlsruhe, we heard from the political leadership. German Federal President Walter Steinmeier was right when he said, dialogue must shed light on what is happening. Dialogue must draw attention to injustice, must identify both victims and perpetrators and their accomplices. However, dialogue that does not go beyond pious wishes and vague generalizations can, in the worst case scenario, become a platform for justification and propaganda. I think this is a diagnosis to this approach, which is practiced by continuing the dialogue in the shape of business as usual. So no desire for changes, no desire to correct the attitude to Russian Orthodox Church, especially through the prism of the war against Ukraine. And as Kirilo Hovorun mentioned, as he says, ecumenism existed before World War II as well, but only after the war, it was given a radically new impetus, which, among other things, led to the creation of WCC. We are now facing a similar impetus. Business as usual discredits the established ecumenical movement. And now I would like to share my opinion. Perhaps it's a bit too general, but I cannot. You have 2 minutes to go. So without repentance, without acknowledging one's mistakes, it's impossible to continue a dialogue with the Russian Orthodox Church. If we continue a dialogue with the same people who sanctified and spiritually justified the war, even calling it holy, then ecumenical dialogue in its current format has outlived itself. Its usefulness became emasculated, it lost in its spiritual component. Ecumenism that is not based on truth and values is empty and fruitless. So now we are experiencing the end to ecumenism as we used to know it. And in Ukraine, we also have certain fatigue with ecumenism. In the 1960s, there was an upsurge in ecumenical context and high expectations for the future. But now those high expectations have cooled. Dialogue on theological matters have become bogged down in detail with no way out in sight, and meetings have been reduced to diplomatic courtesy. Second, the war and the reaction to it have exposed a lack of service to truth and justice in ecumenical relations. As Miroslav Marinovich pointed out yesterday, we need to build on the basis of values, truth, justice, and love, which the global ecumenical movement has largely lost. Very often, I dare say, it turned into a secular diplomacy. Diplomacy is, of course, important, but it can play a major role in interchurch relations. So, because of this fatigue from this regular ecumenism, and because of the war in Ukraine and impossibility to carry it forward as usual, there's a need to reform it. Perhaps had the Ukrainian churches been more brave through our relationship, we would, if we had forced them better, we would be able to set an example. But for now, our churches are still afraid. So, of course, you could speak more about Catholics and Roman Catholics and Protestants. Thank you. Thank you, Taras, for your report. Thank you to all the speakers. I would like to use this time for questions, but being a moderator, I would like to first ask a question myself that stems from the logics behind our discussions. And this is my first question that I address to our colleagues online. This is to Ms. Becredo and Monsignor Prieto. So future Dr. Kurelets just mentioned that you need to think about one's mistakes. You need to be critical about the vestiges of the past. My question is whether the institutions that you represent, you have discussions of this kind about critical evaluation. If you have such discussions going on, then which of mistakes perhaps have been found by now, by this stage of war? If you could give some examples, that would be wonderful. Who would like to go first? Perhaps Monsignor Prieto. I know it's a complicated question, but perhaps you can tell us whether this is even a topic of discussion or not.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really followed with a lot of interest these two interventions from the people there, and it's really a pity not being there because our discussion could be more lively. Answering to your question, I think you're right, and the interventions before were right. That what has happened with the war of aggression with Ukraine, what is going on now, makes us think a lot. If the way we approached before the war, the Russian Federation, but also on an ecclesiastical point of view, the Russian Orthodox Church, if we had things clear, I think that's a legitimate question that can be put. It's a legitimate question. Were we mistaken? Were we a bit, let's see, a bit childish? Didn't we notice that there was a strong influence of KGB in rock before? I think those are questions that can be asked. On the European Union level, that is what we with what we work in COMESIB, because I think we can also ask if the European Union was a bit naive with respect to Russia, and is still a bit naive. I think those are legitimate questions, and I think it's it is convenient that we think about this. If mistakes were not made in this.
Дуже дякую, дуже дякую.
Mm.
Пані Пекріду? Katerina, are you here?
Yes, thank you.
Please.
My brain is burning from all the important input. Thank you both to Anatoly and Taras. I think our analysis is very similar of what is happening. I do believe as well that the Russian war against Ukraine is a defining moment for the geopolitical scheme, but also for the ecumenical institutions as a whole. I think the war showed the limitations of the format of ecumenical dialogue, both on the global level, also on the bilateral level. It just proves that it's the format of another era that doesn't work. Also, it showed the limitations of the Orthodox Church and how they dealt, especially the leadership of the Orthodox churches has dealt with the war. For instance, specific slogan that the leaders used to have in all meetings is that the Orthodox Church is not a federation of churches like the Protestants. It was always this comparison. We are a communion of churches. We are not like the Protestants with many different views. But I think the war has just showed very clearly the limitations of that and of what we thought that it's a well-functioning synodal system. And that has an influence and a reflection also on the structures of the ecumenical movement. Going back to specifically the question that Ole posed, I think in Czech we did do our self-critical examination, and the program we introduced was a response to that, to the realization that the old structures are not actually functioning, and for this new era we need a flexible model where everybody is invited on the table. So in the usual ecumenical debate before the war, Ukrainians were represented through the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the Moscow Patriarchate. This was the official channel. We saw once the war started, even these representatives were not allowed to appear in meetings to officially have a voice, unless they were specifically invited as individuals, like it happened with the World Council of Churches Assembly. So, of course, this has been an unequal relationship. In Czech, we recently had a meeting of most of our churches in Nyborg, and Father Manuel and Marek were also present. And there was a paper by historian Katarina Kunter, which I believe you know, on the history of Czech and the role of the ecumenical movement, especially in the post-Soviet time, and how the ecumenical structures did not actually, including Czech, did not actually engage the dissidents of war. I think we are in a completely different era now. All our bodies in the Conference of European Churches, our consultative bodies and networks, are actually people in the peace movement at the moment. People who speak openly about peace in Ukraine and resistance to the Russian world ideology. So it's a very different time. And I think also this has to do with the change of people and the formation of people. We have a different generation of people who are active. Most of us have been studying in different institutions. They have had ecumenical training. They spend time in different countries. We just think differently about the world. We are not bound to the legacy of the Soviet Union, I would say. And I have more to say, but I'll come back. Maybe others want to talk.
Дуже дякую. Я думаю, що ця остання
Thank you. I think that the final remark about the change of generations gives us a lot of hope. However, I still have another complex question for Ukrainian panelists, but maybe we will discuss it at the dinner. So maybe we could have a question from the participants, but make sure that this is a short question for us to be able to address it. Glory to Jesus Christ. I am Nazari. I represent the Ostroh Academy, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. I would like to share my comment about what Anatoly brought up, the book of Roman Skakun. And there is an interesting continuation because I have a lot of interest to this topic that Roman Skakun explored. And I have the question about the infiltration of those spies in the ecumenical space. And we know that the Filaret Denisenko, the patriarch from the Ukrainian church, we have a lot of important documents with recommendations. That was Exarch of Kiev who recommended doing these things to make sure that we have dissemination of the ideas of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Soviet Union into the ecumenical movement. Well, he doesn't object that. Yes, that is part of his study. So that is not something new, I guess. Yes, absolutely. And he said that, yes, it's important to have students in the Ecumenical Institute of Bossin. They will study there. They will say what is expected from them to say, not in an official level, but just, having this impersonal communication. So there was this attempt to really share this information. That is why I'm not sure what to do about this church, because since those times we know how deep their infiltration is. Well, thank you. Do we have any questions? Any remarks? But yes, maybe it's better to focus on those presentations and speeches that we heard. Glory to Jesus Christ. I'm the candidate. I'm an artist. And this is such an interesting panel. Anatoly, Taras. I find it impressive that Ukraine still doesn't have a real voice in the World Council of Churches. And it's a great pity that you cannot really learn about that at our Ukrainian regional level for this topic to raise, because this is such an injustice that we have been observing. This is a great injustice. And this is some negligence, I think, of the World Council of Churches. This is a problem, and it's been dragging on for so many years already. Underestimation of Ukraine and ignoring of Ukraine. That is why my suggestion would be to raise in the public space of Ukraine this topic and to discuss it, and actually to address the World Council of Churches for Ukraine to be accepted, to actually become a voice in the World Council of Churches at the proper level in this space. Yes. Thank you. And Roman Fihas? The director of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies. Roman Fihas. The Russian war against Ukraine, the hybrid war against NATO states, resulted in many scholars claiming that potential defense of NATO states will never exist as such. If Russia decides to attack any of NATO states, we are not sure that there will be a response. That is why we are considering the idea of having different regional centers from one sea to another sea, consisting of different countries, which could take part in defense of each other. So from the military to ecumenical topic, we can see that there are different tools of the World Council of Churches which are not effective. Maybe it makes sense to have something new, maybe some regional unions of churches which are rooted in values, in the gospel, because, probably that would be my dream, to make these first brave steps. And I think we could start it in Ukraine even. Yes, I think you just have 30 seconds to react. Our panelists. Yes, so Taras, maybe we will start with you. Yes, of the first question, I think this is a procedural question and a historical question, because the problem about Ukrainian churches and participation in the World Council of Churches is, you know, that if you have more than 25,000 of members, and there are two basic criteria, a Unitarian one and another one, but the Ukrainian Catholic Church, which is part of the community, cannot become part of that, because we are not the member of the World Council of Churches, but we are the member of the Commission, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine was marginalized for a long period of time, not voluntarily, of course. And of course, this is an important task. And I think that's the only one which has a chance to become a member of the World Council of Churches. And of course, it requires a lot of efforts to be applied, but it is through collaborative and concerted effort, I think, that that could be achieved. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Katerina. Katerina, yes?
Thank you. I just want to inform you that in all the bodies, commissions and other working groups of the World Council of Churches, there is only one Ukrainian. This is Dr. Andriy Smirnov. And we appointed him as KEK on the group, the reference group on the pilgrimage of justice, reconciliation, and unity. Unfortunately, they are not talking about the war in Ukraine. They are addressing other conflicts, but we have been asking that also Ukraine is addressed. So that's the only Ukrainian, actually, in all of the bodies. That's quite interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. We know him from Ostrog Academy. Yeah. Monsignor Prieto, now is your not last but final possibility to speak to us, to answer maybe on one question.
Yeah. I wanted. I understand a bit what was said. I think it's very important. I think all the criticism also that was made also to the position of the Vatican towards ecumenism, making ecumenism with the Eastern churches go through the Russian Patriarchate, maybe also being a bit naive towards the Russian Orthodox Church, and understanding that its intervention also in ecumenical dialogue wasn't very sincere, possibly many times, and so on. I think there's also all this is very, very important, and I'm very happy to have been in this meeting. But my thought is also a bit of philosophical, and I know that philosophical thought in a context of war and a context where people are dying and suffering is sometimes seems very far and very sort of formal and very detached from life. But I think also when I was involved in ecumenism years ago, going also back to the teachings of Pope Benedict, I think we are in this, let's say, environment of post-truth, which means that now public opinion is more influenced by feelings, by emotions, than by truth and facts. So this makes also a bit difficult what was said today, that for real ecumenism, for real ecumenical dialogue, we have to dialogue from a moral standpoint, with moral clarity and with truth. I think we have to take also this into account. We are in a fight of narratives, and this is a bit difficult. It's a bit difficult. We live this a lot in Western Europe. So I think this philosophical aspect has to be taken into account.
Thank you. І Анатолій, прошу.
Дякую.
Anatoly, over to you. Thank you. Taras has spoken about exhaustion. You know, maybe we do not need to work so hard not to be exhausted by ecumenism, but well, we all understand that sooner or later this war will be over. We really want this moment to happen as soon as possible. There will be the return to ecumenism, no matter how tired we are. As to the building of something new, the war demonstrated something which is really important. Even if you take this official dialogue of the Orthodox and Catholic part, we are discussing very many important ideas, the idea of a primate, but it's really important for us to have a genuine and sincere discussion of their relations between the states and the church. And if the ecumenical dialogue sets these issues aside, there will be no dialogue continuing. There will be another imitation that we have. This is my modest opinion. I can only support you. I would like to express gratitude to all our panelists. I am thankful for your respect to our agenda, for your attention. As far as I know, the organizers have a very good suggestion to continue our communication. Well, in the hall of the university, but there will be something nice for you, some treats, and of course for those panels who are online, make sure that we can also treat you to something nice in Ukrainian when you're here.